"Help, please, someone help me." The scream, sharp and laced with terror, echoed through the concrete stillness of the executive parking garage. It sliced through the low hum of the fluorescent lights, a sound of raw panic in a place of sterile order. Rhys Corrigan, halfway to the service stairwell, froze. The worn backpack slung over his shoulder suddenly felt heavy, an anchor to a life of quiet anonymity he desperately wanted to return to. He flattened himself against a massive concrete pillar, peering around its edge. The scene that unfolded in Stall 1, the spot reserved for the CEO, was one of controlled, brutal violence. Two of the company's famously stoic bodyguards were already on the ground, unmoving. Four men, their features erased by black ski masks, had her cornered against a gleaming sedan. It was Clarion Shaw, the CEO. He recognized her instantly from the corporate photos in the lobby, the determined set of her jaw, the cascade of blonde hair, now wild with her struggle. One of the men, built like a refrigerator, grabbed her arm, trying to drag her toward a black, windowless van parked behind them. Its side door slid open like a hungry mouth. "Get in the van, quietly," the man growled, his voice a low threat. Rhys's heart hammered against his ribs. Every rational thought screamed at him to run. He was a janitor, a ghost who spent his nights polishing floors and emptying the trash of powerful people. He had a 7-year-old daughter, Ilara, waiting for him. He had promised himself, promised the memory of his wife, that the part of his life defined by controlled violence was over, buried along with his black belt and the dojo he'd left behind. Janitors don't get involved. But then she screamed again, and the sound shattered his carefully constructed peace. It wasn't just a plea. It was a demand for someone, anyone, to act. In that instant, the promise he'd made to himself became a luxury he couldn't afford. The janitor retreated, and the sensei, the man whose hands were registered weapons, stepped out of the shadows. He moved with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly at odds with his simple work uniform. The first man, the one holding Ms. Shaw's arm, didn't see him coming until it was too late. Rhys didn't throw a wild punch. He used an open palm, a precise strike to the man's elbow joint. It hyperextended with an audible pop. The man howled, his grip on Clarion vanishing as his arm went limp and useless. The second assailant spun around, pulling a heavy wrench from his belt and swinging it in a vicious arc aimed at Rhys's head. Rhys didn't retreat. He flowed inside the arc, his left forearm deflecting the man's wrist while his right elbow snapped upwards, connecting with the man's chin with brutal, practiced efficiency. The man's head jerked back, and he crumpled to the ground, his strings cut. 2 down. The remaining 2 let go of Clarion, their surprise turning to rage. They came at him together, a flurry of clumsy, powerful punches. They were brawlers, used to overwhelming their victims with raw aggression. They were not prepared for a man who met their chaos with the calm geometry of defense. Rhys was a rock in a raging river, turning their own momentum against them. He sidestepped a haymaker from the third man, grabbing the attacker's wrist and pulling him off balance, directly into the path of his accomplice. They collided in a heap. Before they could untangle themselves, Rhys struck. A sharp, snapping kick to the side of the third man's knee, a spinning back fist to the temple of the fourth. Both went down in a groaning pile on the cold concrete. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The sudden, ringing silence was broken only by the pained whimpers of the 4 men and the ragged, shallow gasps of Clarion Shaw. She had stumbled back against her car, her wide, disbelieving eyes fixed not on her fallen attackers, but on him. The janitor. The warrior's calm that had settled over Rhys evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure panic. What had he done? He rushed to her side, his voice a rough whisper. "Ma'am, Miss Shaw, are you hurt?" She shook her head, still unable to speak, her gaze locked on his face as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. And in that moment, as he knelt to make sure she was okay, he took his eyes off the threat. It was a rookie mistake. The sound of screeching tires tore through the garage. Dazed but desperate, the four men were scrambling back into the van. The engine roared, and the vehicle shot out of the parking garage, vanishing into the night. They were gone. He heard the distant ding of the executive elevator, followed by the frantic pounding of footsteps and alarmed shouts. "Miss Shaw, code red in P1, more security. They were coming!" Reese shot to his feet, his mind racing. He could not be here. A janitor who could disable 4 trained men. It would invite questions he couldn't answer, exposing a past he had fought to bury. It would threaten the simple, safe world he had built for Alara. He looked at Clarion one last time. Her expression was a storm of confusion, fear, and something else. Something he couldn't decipher. "Stay here. They're coming for you," he said, his voice low and urgent. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and vanished back into the forest of concrete pillars, his heart pounding a frantic retreat. He was a ghost again, a man in a gray uniform leaving behind a scene of impossible chaos. 2 unconscious bodyguards, and a CEO whose life had just been saved by a man she had never truly seen before. He took the emergency stairs down to the street, his knuckles throbbing, the ghost of his old life clinging to him like a shroud. As he stood at the bus stop, forcing his breathing to slow, he tried to blend in with the other tired faces heading home. He prayed that in the dim light of the garage, in the blur of violence, his face was just a fleeting shadow. He prayed to simply be Reese Corrigan, Ilara's dad. But as the bus hissed to a stop, he knew, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the quiet life was over. The silence had been broken, and the echo would follow him home. The bus ride home was an exercise in forced calm. Reese stared out at the blur of city lights, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his knuckles scraped and aching. Every siren he heard sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He half expected police cars to surround the bus at any moment, to drag him out, to ask questions he couldn't answer. But the bus just rumbled on, carrying him from one world to another, from the gleaming steel tower of Shaw Industries to the quiet, tree-lined street where he and Alara lived. He let himself into their small second-floor apartment. The scent of lavender from the plug-in air freshener and the faint, sweet smell of cinnamon from Alara's oatmeal that morning greeted him. It was the scent of home, the scent of safety. He walked into his daughter's room. She was fast asleep, her small form a little lump under a unicorn-themed comforter, her breathing soft and even. A nightlight cast a warm, gentle glow on her face. This was why he ran. This small, perfect, peaceful world. For 2 years since his wife Anya had passed, he had built this fortress of normalcy around Alara, brick by brick. A steady, unexciting job. Predictable routines. No surprises. Tonight he had taken a sledgehammer to the foundations. He sank into the worn armchair in the corner of her room, the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion and a gnawing fear of what the morning would bring. Meanwhile, back in the cold, sterile parking garage, Clarion Shaw was surrounded by a whirlwind of frantic activity. Her head of security, a stern-faced man named Barrett, was barking orders into a radio while paramedics checked on her 2 downed bodyguards. They were concussed, but would be fine. The police had arrived, their flashing lights painting the concrete walls in strobing blues and reds. "Ma'am, we need to get you to a secure location," Barrett said, his voice tight with a mixture of concern and professional embarrassment. His team had failed. Spectacularly. Clarion barely heard him. Her mind was replaying the 10 seconds of impossible violence. The blur of the janitor's uniform. The calm, economic precision of his movements. He hadn't fought like a brawler. He had moved like a dancer, a surgeon of force, disabling 4 men before they even understood what was happening. And his eyes, in the moment he'd knelt beside her, she'd seen not anger, but a deep, quiet worry. Then, pure panic as he realized he'd been seen. "The security footage," she said, her voice cutting through Barrett's nervous chatter. I want to see it. Now. Ma'am, the police will handle the investigation. Now, Barrett, she repeated, her voice dropping to a tone that left no room for argument. The tone that had made her the youngest CEO in the company's history. In my office. 15 minutes later, she sat in her vast corner office, the glittering city spread out below her. Barrett stood beside her desk, his face grim as he queued up the footage on her monitor. The camera angle isn't ideal, Miss Shaw. It's partially obstructed by that pillar. The video flickered to life. It was just as he'd said, grainy and shot from a distance. She watched the attack unfold, her own terror a cold knot in her stomach. Then, a figure emerged from behind the pillar. The footage was too blurry to make out a clear face, but it captured the motion, the shocking speed and efficiency. She saw him disable the men. She saw him rush to her side, and then she saw him look up, directly toward a secondary camera for just a fraction of a second, his face caught in a moment of unguarded panic, before he turned and fled. "Freeze it," Clarion commanded. "Right there." Barrett froze the frame. "It's still not clear enough for facial recognition." "I don't need facial recognition," Clarion said, leaning closer to the screen. "I know who he is. He's one of the janitors, the night crew. Find out his name." Barrett looked baffled. "The janitor? Ma'am, that's—" "The only reason you're not explaining my abduction to the board of directors right now, Barrett," she finished for him, her voice like ice. "Get me his file." An hour later, the file was on her desk. Reese Corrigan. Age 36. Employed by Shaw Industries Contracted Cleaning Service for 23 months. A single photo, a standard ID badge picture, stared up at her. It was him. The eyes were the same. Beneath the basic employee data, a line caught her attention. Previous employment. Self-employed. "That's not enough," she muttered to herself. She picked up her phone. "Get me a full background check on a Reese Corrigan, everything you can find. I want it expedited. I don't care what it costs." She sent Barrett and the police away, telling them she needed to rest. But she didn't rest. She paced her office, the image of the fight, of Reese's face, burned into her mind. The attack was professional, targeted. This wasn't a random mugging. This was an attempt to remove her. The thought sent a chill down her spine. Who in her world would do this? A competitor? A rival on her own board? The possibilities were a venomous snake pit. Her security had failed. The police were following standard, slow-moving procedures. The only person who had been effective was a man who scrubbed floors for a living. A man who had run from the scene not like a criminal, but like a man terrified of being seen as a hero. At 3 a.m., her private email pinged. The background check was complete. She opened the encrypted file, and there it was. His entire buried life laid bare in cold, digital text. Reese Corrigan, former owner and head instructor of the Way of the Open Hand Martial Arts Academy. Multiple photos of him, younger, smiling, his waist circled by a black belt. A man who had competed nationally, who had trained law enforcement officers, who had built a small empire on the principles of discipline and defense. And then, the tragedy. His wife, Anya Corrigan, diagnosed with a rare aggressive cancer. The academy was sold to pay for her medical bills. The bills had piled up anyway. 2 years later, she was gone. And Reese Corrigan, the sensei, the champion, had vanished. He had buried himself, taking on a job that required nothing of him but his hands, a job where no one would ever look at him twice. Clarion sank back into her leather chair, the pieces clicking into place. He wasn't hiding from the law. He was hiding from life. He had a skill set her entire multi-million-dollar security budget couldn't replicate, and he was using it to mop hallways. A new resolve, hard as diamond, formed in her mind. Her world was filled with men in expensive suits who postured and plotted, their loyalty as flexible as the market. Her life was in danger, and she was surrounded by wolves disguised as colleagues. She couldn't trust any of them. But she could trust him. The man who had acted not for money, not for glory, but out of pure, selfless instinct. The man who had risked everything to save a stranger. She stood up, grabbing her car keys and the manila folder with his address in it. Barrett would have a fit if he knew she was leaving without a security detail. She didn't care. She was done with his brand of security. She needed a guardian. A shield. The engine of her silver Aston Martin purred to life, a sound of obscene wealth in the pre-dawn silence. She drove through the sleeping city, leaving her glass tower behind and heading toward the quiet, working-class neighborhood Reese Corrigan called home. As the sun began to cast its first pale gray light over the horizon, her car, a vessel from another universe, slowed to a stop. She looked from the address on the paper to the modest 3-story brick apartment building in front of her. He was in there, the man who held the key to her survival, and she was about to blow his carefully constructed world apart. The knock on the door came at 7:15 a.m. Reese, who hadn't slept, felt a jolt of pure adrenaline, cold and sharp. He was in the kitchen, making Alara's lunch for school, a turkey sandwich cut into the shape of a star, just how she liked it. He froze, his hand hovering over the bread. It was too early for a neighbor, too official sounding for a friend. This was it. The police, or company security. The consequences had arrived. "Daddy, someone's at the door," Alara called from the living room, where she was watching cartoons, a half-eaten bowl of Cheerios on the small table in front of her. "I know, sweetie. You stay right there," he said, his voice calmer than he felt. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the police. It was her, Clarion Shaw. She stood in the drab linoleum-floored hallway of his apartment building, looking completely out of place, a figure from a glossy magazine dropped into the real world. Beside her, parked at the curb and visible through the hallway window, was the silver Aston Martin. He took a deep breath and opened the door. She looked even more imposing up close. Dressed in a sharply tailored pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant ponytail. She looked every inch the powerful CEO. Her blue eyes were piercing, missing nothing as they took in the small, clean, but clearly worn interior of his apartment. "Mr. Corrigan," she said. Her voice was crisp, with no hint of the terror he'd heard in it just hours before. "Ms. Shaw," he replied, his own voice quiet. He instinctively blocked the doorway, a subconscious attempt to keep her world from invading his. "What are you doing here?" "May I come in?" It wasn't really a question. He hesitated for a second, then stepped back, letting her pass. She walked into the center of his small living room, her expensive heels silent on the faded rug. She glanced at the cartoons playing on the TV, at the crayon drawings taped to the wall, at the fortress of normalcy he had built. "I came to thank you," she said, turning to face him. "You saved my life." "I didn't do anything," he said automatically, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "I just happened to be there." A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. "Please don't insult my intelligence, Mr. Corrigan. I ran a background check on you." She held up the manila folder she was carrying. "Or should I say, Sensei Corrigan, owner of the Way of the Open Hand Academy. Black belt, trainer of law enforcement. You're not a janitor. You're a warrior hiding in a janitor's uniform." Reese felt the blood drain from his face. She knew. She had unearthed the life he had tried so hard to bury. "That life is over," he said, his voice flat. "I'm just a guy trying to raise his daughter." "The men who attacked me were professionals," she went on, ignoring his protest. "This wasn't a random mugging. It was a planned abduction, and it will happen again. My security team, the men I pay a fortune to protect me, were taken out in seconds. You were the only one who stopped them." She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. "I am offering you a job, effective immediately. You will be my new head of security. You'll report only to me. You will name your price. The offer hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. He shook his head. A single firm motion. Number, I appreciate the offer, Miss Shaw, but no, I can't. Why not? Look around you, he said, gesturing at the small apartment, at the sounds of his daughter's cartoons. This is my life now. It's quiet, it's safe. The reason I left that other world behind is so I could protect her. His voice dropped, thick with an emotion he rarely lets surface. I will not bring that kind of danger anywhere near my daughter. Ever. He expected her to argue, to push. Instead, she just nodded, as if she'd anticipated his exact response. You think the quiet life is still an option? She asked, her voice dangerously soft. You think the men who came for me won't try to find out who stopped them? They're not amateurs, Reese. They will look for loose ends. And right now, you are the biggest loose end there is. What happens to Alara's safety when they decide the janitor who foiled their plan needs to be silenced? His blood ran cold. She had taken his reason for refusing and turned it into a weapon against him. He had been so focused on the danger of accepting, he hadn't considered the danger of refusing. The danger isn't coming to your door because of me, she pressed on, seeing the crack in his resolve. It's already here, because of what you did last night. The only choice you have left is whether you want to face it from the inside, with all of my resources at your disposal, or wait for it to find you here, alone. She placed the folder on his small coffee table. I can provide a life for your daughter you can only dream of. The best schools, a home with a yard, a future where she never has to worry about anything. All you have to do is the one thing you're better at than anyone else: protect people. He stood there, trapped, the walls of his safe little world closing in on him. He felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to see Alara standing beside him, her wide, curious brown eyes fixed on the beautiful stranger in their living room. "Daddy, who's that?" she whispered. Clarion's entire demeanor shifted. The formidable CEO vanished, replaced by something softer. She knelt, bringing herself down to Alara's level. "Hello there," she said, her voice warm and gentle. "My name is Clarion. It's very nice to meet you." "I'm Alara," his daughter said shyly. "Are you a queen? You have a shiny car like a queen." A genuine smile, the first one Reese had seen, lit up Clarion's face. It transformed her. "Something like that," she said. "Your daddy is a very brave man. Did you know that?" Alara beamed, looking up at him with pure adoration. "He's the bravest," she said, with the certainty only a 7-year-old can possess. That was the final blow. Seeing his daughter look at him with such pride, seeing the warmth in Clarion's eyes as she spoke to her, and feeling the cold, inescapable logic of her argument settle in his gut. He was a protector. Hiding from that fact wouldn't keep his daughter safe. It would only leave her vulnerable. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "All right," he said, the word feeling foreign in his own mouth. "I'll do it." Clarion stood up, her professional mask slipping back into place, but her eyes held a new light of victory and relief. She pulled a slim, metallic card from her pocket. It wasn't a business card. It was a high-level security pass. "This will give you access to everything. My office, my home, the security hub. Your job starts now. My car is waiting downstairs." She paused, her gaze softening again as she looked from him to Alara. "We'll discuss salary and arrangements for your daughter's care later today. I promise you, she will be looked after as if she were my own." She turned and walked to the door, leaving him standing in the middle of his living room, the key card feeling both impossibly light and unbearably heavy in his hand. His life as a janitor was over. "Daddy," Alara whispered, tugging on his shirt. "Is that lady your new boss?" Reese looked down at his daughter, then at the key card that was a passport to a world of danger he had tried so desperately to escape. He was no longer hiding. He was the shield. "Yes, sweetie," he said, his voice rough. "I guess she is." The 45-minute drive to Shaw Tower was a silent, surreal journey. Reese sat in the passenger seat of the Aston Martin, the scent of expensive leather a world away from the familiar disinfectant smell of his janitor's cart. Clarion drove with a focused, unnerving calm, navigating the morning traffic as if the events of the last 12 hours were nothing more than an inconvenient business problem to be solved. They didn't speak. The offer had been made, the deal struck. Now, the work began. Before they'd left, Reese had made a quick, apologetic call to his neighbor, Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow with a grandmotherly affection for Alara. He'd spun a vague story about a work emergency, a promotion, and a long day of training. She'd agreed to take Alara to school and have her over afterwards, her voice full of genuine delight for his supposed good fortune. The lie felt heavy in his chest, the first of many he knew he would have to tell to protect his daughter from the truth. As they pulled into the private underground entrance of the tower, the same garage where he had fought for his life, Reese felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Clarion swiped a card, and a heavy gate lifted, granting them access to a section he had never been permitted to enter. She parked in the CEO's reserved spot, stall 1. "Barrett, my former head of security, will meet us in the security hub," she said, finally breaking the silence as she cut the engine. "He's not happy about this. None of them will be. They will see your old uniform, not your skills. That's their weakness. Don't let it be yours." "It won't be," Reese said quietly. He followed her to a private elevator. When the doors opened into the main lobby, a few of his old colleagues from the night crew, just getting off their long shift, saw him. Their faces registered a flicker of confusion. He was coming from the wrong direction, with the wrong person, wearing the wrong clothes. He gave them a short, almost imperceptible nod and walked on, leaving their bewildered stares behind him. The security hub was in the sub-basement, a brightly lit, climate-controlled room humming with the quiet power of a dozen servers and a wall of high-definition monitors. It was the building's nerve center. Barrett was waiting for them. A thick-necked man with a military posture and eyes that were cold with resentment. 2 other guards flanked him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Ms. Shaw," Barrett said, his voice clipped. He pointedly ignored Reese. "I strongly advise against this, bringing in an unknown, unvetted civilian. He is not a civilian, Barrett, and as of this morning, he is your boss," Clarion stated, her voice leaving no room for debate. She turned to Reese. "This is your ship to command. I'll be in my office." She turned and left, the click of her heels echoing down the corridor, leaving Reese alone with the wolves. A tense silence descended. Barrett crossed his arms, his gaze openly contemptuous. "So, the janitor is in charge now. What's your first order? Want us to check the pH levels of the mop water?" The other 2 guards smirked. Reese ignored the jibe. He walked to the main console, his eyes scanning the wall of monitors. "Pull up the footage from P1 last night, all angles, and sync the audio from your team's comms." Barrett scoffed but gestured to one of the younger guards, who typed a few commands. The fight from last night filled the screens, a chaotic ballet of violence seen from 4 different perspectives. Reese watched, his expression unreadable. He wasn't watching himself. He was studying his opponents. "There," he said, pointing to a monitor. "Rewind 10 seconds before the first contact. Zoom in on your men." The guard complied. The footage showed Clarion's 2 bodyguards walking her to the car. They looked relaxed, comfortable. "Play it, slow motion," Reese commanded. He pointed at the ear of one of the bodyguards. "Right there. See his hand? He's tapping his earpiece. He's lost his connection to the hub." "Now look at the other one. Same gesture 1 second later. Their comms were jammed. It's why they were disoriented when the attack started. This was a professional hit, planned by someone who knows your security protocols." Barrett's smirk faltered. He leaned closer to the screen. He hadn't noticed that. "Now, the van," Reese continued, moving to another screen showing the vehicle speeding away. "It's a standard commercial model, untraceable, but look at the rear window." He pointed. "A decal, small, a bird of some kind, a raptor. It's not standard. It's a marker." That's our first real lead. The guard stared at the screen. None of them had seen the decal. From now on, nothing gets near Ms. Shaw without my personal approval, Reese said, his voice now carrying a weight of authority that hadn't been there before. We're changing her routes to and from the office daily. A 3-man escort at all times, not 2. 1 stays with the car, and I want full files on every single member of the security staff, day and night shifts. We're looking for anyone with financial problems, grievances, or unusual patterns of behavior. The threat isn't just outside this building, it's inside. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Barrett's hostility had been replaced by a grudging respect. This man saw things they didn't. He thought like a predator, not like a guard waiting for an alarm to go off. Just then, a light blinked on the console. "Delivery for Miss Shaw," one of the guards announced. "It's from the Viridian Floral Group. A rare orchid. It's cleared for entry." Reese's eyes narrowed. "Hold it at reception. I'll go myself." He left the hub and went up to the main lobby. A courier was waiting with a large, elegantly wrapped box. Reese signed for it and took it not to Clarion's office, but to an empty conference room. He placed the box on the long mahogany table and carefully opened it. Inside was a stunning orchid, its deep purple petals looking almost unreal. It was beautiful. A peace offering, perhaps, or a gesture of goodwill. But Reese didn't trust gestures. He ran his fingers along the ceramic pot, feeling for any inconsistencies. He gently sifted through the rich, dark soil, and then he felt it. A small, hard object, no bigger than a grain of rice, nestled near the roots. He carefully extracted it. It was a tiny, sophisticated listening device, its microphone almost invisible to the naked eye. A chill ran down his spine. They hadn't just tried to take her, they were trying to listen to her. The delivery had been cleared for entry. Someone on the inside had approved it. Someone wanted to know every secret she spoke. He walked out of the conference room and took the private elevator to the top floor. He entered Clarion's office without knocking. She was on the phone, her voice sharp and commanding. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw his expression. "I have to call you back," she said into the phone and hung up. "What is it? What's wrong?" Reese walked to her massive desk and opened his palm. The tiny black bug sat in the center, a miniature instrument of betrayal. "They're already in your office," he said, his voice grim. Clarion stared at the device, all the color draining from her face. The enemy wasn't at the gates. They were already in the castle. And his new job had just become infinitely more dangerous. The air in the penthouse office, usually buzzing with the silent energy of command, was suddenly cold and still. Clarion stared at the tiny black bug in Reese's palm, her expression hardening from shock into a mask of icy fury. This was an act of profound violation. The enemy wasn't just trying to harm her body. They were trying to colonize her mind, to steal her thoughts, her strategies, her secrets. She looked up at Reese, her eyes sharp and analytical. In that moment, he wasn't her employee. He was her only ally. She picked up a pen from her desk and slid a leather-bound notepad towards him. They could be listening now. Reese understood immediately. He nodded, his gaze sweeping the room, reevaluating every object, the lamps, the digital photo frames, the television screen, as a potential threat. He wrote his reply on the pad. "We need to sweep this office, your home, your car, everything. I know a guy, someone from my old life. I trust him." Clarion gave a single, sharp nod. "Do it." She trusted him. The realization settled on Reese with an immense weight. 2 days ago, he was mopping her floors. Now she was placing her entire life, her entire empire, in his hands. He took out his phone and sent a short, encrypted text to a number he hadn't contacted in over 2 years. "Kenji, I need a favor, a big one." The reply came back almost instantly. "Name the place and time, Sensei. For you, anything." That evening, after the last of the executives had gone home, A young man with sharp, intelligent eyes and spiky, dyed black hair arrived at the executive lobby. He was dressed in the unassuming uniform of a third-party IT consultant, complete with a rolling case of equipment. This was Kenji Tanaka. Reese had taken him under his wing as a troubled teenager, channeling his restless genius for hacking into the disciplined art of cybersecurity. Now, Kenji owned one of the most respected technical surveillance countermeasures firms in the city. "It's been a while, Sensei," Kenji said quietly as Reese led him into Clarion's silent, darkened office. "It's good to see you, Kenji," Reese replied. "But I wish it were under better circumstances." For the next 2 hours, Kenji worked with a quiet, focused intensity. He moved through the office like a ghost, his specialized equipment sweeping the airwaves, detecting frequencies that shouldn't exist. He found a second bug taped to the back of the massive landscape painting behind Clarion's desk. He found a third, even smaller one, inside the base of her desk lamp. "This is professional-grade stuff," Kenji murmured, placing the tiny devices in evidence bags. "Military spec. Whoever is doing this has deep pockets and serious connections. They've been listening to everything." The confirmation sent a fresh chill through the room. Clarion, who had been watching in stoic silence, finally spoke. "The orchid it came in. The delivery was from a place called Viridian Floral Group." While Kenji finished his sweep, Reese was on a computer in the security hub, digging into the floral company. The order for the orchid was a ghost. It was a walk-in purchase made with cash 3 days prior. No name, no phone number, no credit card. A complete dead end, just as the person who sent it intended. "They're covering their tracks," Reese said, his voice tight with frustration when he returned to the office. "Maybe," Kenji said, holding up one of the evidence bags. "But even professionals leave a signature." He pointed to the tiny bug from the orchid. "The power source on this one is unique. It's a custom-made micro-battery. Only a handful of manufacturers make them, and they sell them to a very select clientele. Let me take these back to my lab. I might be able to trace the components to a specific buyer." By the time Kenji packed up his gear, it was nearly midnight. Clarion, looking pale and exhausted, insisted on driving Reese home. The silence in the car was different this time. It wasn't tense. It was companionable, the shared silence of 2 soldiers after a long, grueling battle. "Your friend Kenji," she said as they drove through the empty streets. "He's very loyal to you." "I helped him out when he was a kid," Reese said simply. "He just needed someone to point him in the right direction." "You seem to be good at that," she said softly. She glanced at him. "Tell me about Alara." The question caught him off guard. He rarely spoke of his daughter to anyone, let alone the COO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But looking at her, seeing the genuine exhaustion and vulnerability in her eyes, he found himself talking. He told her about Alara's love for drawing, her terrible knock-knock jokes, the way she looked when she was concentrating on a puzzle. He spoke of her with a warmth and love that filled the small, leather-scented space. When they pulled up to his apartment, Mrs. Gable was waiting at the door with a sleepy Alara, who had insisted on staying up to say goodnight to her dad. Alara's face lit up when she saw Reese, but then she saw Clarion getting out of the car. She ran right past her father and straight to the CEO. "Hi, Queen Clarion," she said, holding up a piece of paper. "I drew you a picture of your shiny car." The drawing was a child's wonderful scrawl of a silver rectangle with 4 black circles, with stick figures of her and Clarion inside. Clarion crouched down, her fatigue melting away as she took the drawing as if it were a priceless work of art. "Alara, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she said, her voice thick with an emotion Reese couldn't quite place. "Thank you. I'm going to put this up in my office." She looked up at Reese over Alara's head, and in that moment, under the dim glow of the streetlights, he saw something in her eyes that had nothing to do with business or danger. He saw a flicker of loneliness, a longing for this simple, uncomplicated warmth. Later, After he had thanked Mrs. Gable and tucked a happy Alara into bed, he sat in his armchair, the silence of the apartment feeling heavier than usual. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Kenji. Got it. The micro batteries were part of a single, large batch sold 6 months ago. The buyer was a private security contractor called Aegis Solutions. Reese's blood ran cold. He knew that name. He pulled up the file he'd started on the security staff and board members. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Another text from Kenji came through before he could finish. And you're not going to believe who owns Aegis Solutions. They're a subsidiary of a holding company owned by one of your board members, a man named Lachlan Graves. Reese stopped typing. Lachlan Graves, a man known for his ruthless ambition, a man who had openly and bitterly opposed Clarion's appointment as CEO. The enemy now had a name and a face, and he was sitting at the same table as the woman he was trying to destroy. The name on the screen seemed to burn with a cold, blue light. Lachlan Graves. Reese stared at his phone, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into a horrifying picture. It wasn't just a random corporate rival. It was one of them. A man who sat in the same boardroom as Clarion, who smiled at her, who shook her hand, all while orchestrating a campaign to destroy her. Sleep was no longer an option. His mind, trained for strategy and threat assessment, began to work the problem. He had a name, but he had no proof. Graves was insulated, protected by layers of corporations and plausible deniability. Owning a security firm wasn't a crime. They couldn't go to the police with this. A man like Graves would bury them in lawsuits, paint Clarion as unstable, and him as a paranoid, power-hungry janitor. A direct confrontation was a losing move. They had to force him to show his hand. The next morning, he wasn't at Shaw Tower. He was parked in a nondescript sedan a block away from a private, gated community in the city's most affluent suburb. He watched as Clarion's Aston Martin pulled out, her face a pale, determined mask behind the wheel. He followed her. They had agreed via coded text not to meet at her home or the office. Both were compromised. Their new headquarters was a small, soundproofed recording studio Kenji had leased under a fake name 2 hours ago. Inside the studio, the air was thick with tension. Reese laid out everything he knew. The corporate org charts linking Graves to Aegis Solutions, the specs on the military-grade bugs. He's been my family's rival for decades, Clarion said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. His father competed with my father. Lachlan believed he should have been named CEO after my father retired. He's never forgiven the board for choosing me instead. Her hands clenched into fists on the table. He's not just trying to take my company. This is personal. Which means he's emotional, Reese countered, his voice steady. And emotional people make mistakes. We just have to give him a reason to make one. He laid out his plan. It was audacious, risky, and hinged entirely on Lachlan Graves's arrogance and greed. Clarion listened intently, her sharp, analytical mind absorbing every detail. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator. Let's go hunting, she said. 2 days later, Clarion called an emergency board meeting. She stood at the head of the long, polished table, looking confident, energized. Reese stood against the back wall, a silent, watchful presence in a well-tailored suit that Kenji had insisted he buy. He looked the part of head of security, and his very presence unsettled the other board members. I have incredible news, Clarion announced, her voice ringing with excitement. I have been in secret negotiations for the past month to acquire Kestrel Dynamics, the Seattle-based robotics firm. It's a game changer, an acquisition that will secure our dominance in the tech sector for the next 20 years. A murmur of shock and excitement went through the room. Kestrel was a titan, and the acquisition would be a massive coup. The deal is in its final delicate stages, she continued. I am flying to Seattle tomorrow night to meet with their CEO and sign the final papers. The announcement will be made public on Friday. Reese watched Lachlan Graves. The man's face was a perfect mask of pleasant surprise. He was the first to speak. "Clarion, this is astonishing news! A brilliant move! Congratulations!" But Reese saw it. A flicker of something cold and calculating in his eyes. The bait was taken. There was no way Graves would let her close a deal that would make her untouchable. For the next 24 hours, the executive floor was a hive of carefully orchestrated deception. Reese moved through the offices, speaking loudly on his phone about flight numbers and hotel reservations. All fake. He argued with Barrett in the security hub about the lax security protocols at the Seattle hotel, ensuring the conversation was overheard. He played the part of a new security chief, competent but slightly out of his depth, making the entire operation seem vulnerable. In reality, Reese was pulling together a small, hand-picked team of security operators he'd known from his old life. Men who owed him favors, men whose loyalty was to him, not a paycheck. Kenji, meanwhile, was turning a foreclosed warehouse in the city's industrial outskirts into a state-of-the-art tactical trap, rigging it with cameras, microphones, and remote-controlled floodlights. The night of the trip arrived. A black SUV, identical to Clarion's usual transport, pulled away from Shaw Tower. Inside was a small security detail and a woman with blonde hair, a body double Reese had hired. Reese and the real Clarion were already miles away, hidden in a mobile command center Kenji had set up in a van a quarter-mile from the warehouse. "They're on the move," Kenji said, his eyes glued to a laptop displaying a GPS tracker. He had managed to get a micro-tracker onto the car of one of Graves's known associates from Aegis Solutions. "They're following the decoy. Just as you predicted, Sensei." Reese watched on another monitor, a live feed from a traffic camera. He saw the Aegis car, a black sedan, tailing the SUV. "They're going to hit them on the industrial access road, just past the bridge. It's isolated." Clarion sat beside him, her face illuminated by the glow of the screens, her knuckles white. She was watching a plan to simulate her own abduction. It happened exactly as Reese had said it would. Two black vans boxed in the SUV on the deserted road. Men in tactical gear swarmed the vehicle. The feed cut out as they disabled the cameras. "They have her," Clarion whispered, her voice tight. "They have the decoy," Reese corrected her calmly. He keyed a small microphone. "All teams, they're on their way to you. Go dark. Await my signal." 10 minutes later, a new set of monitors flickered to life. Kenji's cameras inside the warehouse. The black vans pulled into the cavernous, dusty space. The armed men pulled the struggling, hooded body double from the SUV. They were confident, professional. Their leader, a tall man with a jagged scar on his cheek, pulled out a phone. "We have her," he said into the phone. "No complications." He paused, listening. "Understood. We'll hold her here until you arrive." He ended the call and turned to his men. "Mr. Graves is on his way. Get her prepped." He ripped the hood off the body double's head. His face fell. It wasn't Clarion Shaw. It was a stranger, a woman with fear in her eyes, but also a flicker of defiance. She was an actress, and she was playing her part perfectly. "What is this?" the man with the scar snarled, realizing they'd been tricked. "Where is she?" At that exact moment, a series of powerful, blinding floodlights clicked on, bathing the entire warehouse in brilliant white light. The armed men flinched, throwing their hands up to shield their eyes. Reese stepped out from behind a stack of shipping containers, a calm, imposing silhouette against the light. His own small team emerged from the shadows on all sides, weapons raised, completely surrounding Graves' men. He looked at the scarred man, his voice echoing in the vast, silent space. "You were expecting someone else?" For a heartbeat, the warehouse was frozen in a tableau of shock. The brilliant floodlights bleached all color from the scene, casting long, stark shadows. Jago, the scarred leader of the Aegis team, stared at Reese, his mind struggling to process the scale of the disaster. Then his training kicked in. "It's a trap! Take them!" he roared, raising his weapon. But Reese had anticipated the chaos. "Now!" he commanded into his own throat mic. The battle wasn't a prolonged firefight. It was a symphony of controlled, tactical violence. From the catwalks above, 2 of Reese's operators deployed flashbang grenades that erupted with deafening cracks and blinding light, disorienting half of Jago's team. Kenji, from his command van, killed the main floodlights, plunging the warehouse back into a disorienting darkness, but Reese and his team were equipped with night vision goggles. They owned the shadows. The Aegis operators, accustomed to being the predators, were now the prey. They fired blindly into the dark, their muzzle flashes giving away their positions. Reese's team responded with disciplined single shots, aiming for limbs, not kills. One by one, Jago's men were neutralized, their cries of pain echoing in the vast space. Reese moved through the chaos like a phantom. He didn't fire a shot. He closed the distance, using the stacks of crates and machinery as cover. He found Jago trying to rally his crumbling squad near the loading bay doors. "You!" Jago snarled, recognizing him. He lunged, a combat knife flashing in his hand. He was big and powerful, a brawler relying on brute force. Reese was a master of a more ancient, more intelligent art. He met Jago's wild slash not with a block, but with a fluid redirection, using the man's own momentum to spin him off balance. An elbow strike to the collarbone, a sweeping leg kick that took Jago's feet out from under him. The big man crashed to the concrete floor, the wind knocked out of him. Before he could recover, Reese had his arm twisted behind his back in a submission hold that sent waves of agonizing pain through his shoulder. The knife clattered to the floor. "It's over," Reese said, his voice low and calm in Jago's ear. As if on cue, the main floodlights came back on, revealing the scene. All 10 of the Aegis operators were down, being zip-tied by Reese's team. The fight was finished. At that moment, the purr of an expensive engine drifted in from outside. A black Mercedes sedan pulled up to the open loading bay door. The back door opened, and Lachlan Graves stepped out, an arrogant, satisfied smile on his face. He was expecting to see a captured Clarion, a victory delivered. Instead, his smile froze, then melted into a mask of pure disbelief. He saw his elite team, his trusted Aegis operators, subdued on the ground. He saw Reese Corrigan, the janitor, standing over his commander. And then he saw Clarion Shaw herself step out from behind the mobile command van, her expression as cold and hard as a diamond. Lachlan's face went pale. He tried to retreat, to get back in the car, but 2 of Reese's men were already there, blocking his path. He was trapped. Clarion walked slowly towards him, her heels clicking on the grimy concrete. "You look surprised to see me, Lachlan," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Clarion, what is this? I got a frantic call about a security breach," he stammered, his mind scrambling for a lie. "Save it," she cut him off. She nodded towards Reese. Reese hauled Jago to his feet and pushed him in front of Graves. The scarred man looked at his boss, his eyes pleading. "Jago," Reese said calmly, "you have a choice. You can take the fall for all of this. Attempted kidnapping, assault, corporate espionage. You'll spend the next 20 years in a federal prison, and this man," he gestured to Graves, "will forget your name before the cell door closes, or you can tell us everything, right now, and I will see to it that the DA knows you cooperated." Jago stared at Lachlan's panicked, sweating face. He saw no loyalty there, no honor. He saw only a rich, powerful man ready to cut him loose to save himself. His expression hardened with betrayal. "He hired us," Jago spat, the words tumbling out in a torrent of anger. "All of it. The first attack in the garage. The bugs in your office. This. He wanted you taken. He wanted to use your disappearance to trigger a no-confidence vote from the board and seize control of the company." Lachlan's face crumpled. "He's lying. This is a setup. You can't prove any of this." "Actually," Clarion said, a small, cruel smile on her lips, "we can. She pointed to a small, discreet camera on a nearby pillar. "Lachlan, I'd like you to say hello to the Shaw Industries Board of Directors. They've been watching this little drama unfold on a live, secure video feed for the past 10 minutes. The last ounce of fight drained out of Lachlan Graves. He looked physically smaller, a deflated balloon of arrogance and greed. He was ruined. As of this moment, you are removed from the board for gross misconduct and criminal conspiracy," Clarion announced, her voice ringing with finality. "Security and the authorities are on their way. You have disgraced your family's name, and you will spend the rest of your life paying for it." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. As uniformed police officers swarmed the warehouse to take a mumbling, defeated Lachlan Graves and his men into custody, a quiet stillness fell between Reese and Clarion. The air, which had been electric with violence and tension, was now calm. They stood amidst the aftermath of their victory, the flashing red and blue lights painting their faces. The war was over. Clarion turned to him, the hard CEO mask finally falling away, revealing the exhausted, vulnerable woman beneath. Her eyes were filled with a profound gratitude that went far beyond an employer and her head of security. "It's over," she whispered, the words filled with relief. Reese looked at her, at the powerful woman who had trusted him, at the unlikely partner with whom he had just faced down a dragon. He thought of his quiet life, the one he had lost, and the new, uncertain one that was just beginning. "The threat is," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "The rest is just beginning." In the week that followed, the chaos subsided and was replaced by the quiet, methodical process of cleaning up. The story of Lachlan Graves' attempted takeover and subsequent arrest sent shockwaves through the city's financial district, but inside Shaw Tower there was a palpable sense of relief. The poison had been cut out. Clarion was a force of nature. She moved with renewed purpose, consolidating her control over the company, her authority now unquestionable. The board, having witnessed her courage and strategic brilliance firsthand, was united behind her. The failed acquisition of Kestrel Dynamics was forgotten, replaced by the reality of a CEO who had faced down a threat from within and emerged stronger than ever. Reese, too, settled into his new reality. He was no longer the janitor playing a role. He was the head of global security for Shaw Industries, a title that now felt less like a costume and more like a second skin. He spent his days dismantling the old security apparatus, a system built on complacency, and rebuilding it from the ground up. He promoted the guards who had shown initiative and courage, and he brought in his own trusted people, including Kenji, who was given a lucrative contract to overhaul the company's entire cybersecurity infrastructure. The whispers about the janitor boss died out quickly, replaced by a quiet respect for the man who saw everything and missed nothing. The professional lines between Reese and Clarion, however, had blurred into non-existence. They were no longer just boss and employee. They were survivors of the same shipwreck, tied together by a bond forged in shared danger. Their meetings often drifted from security protocols to quiet conversations about their day. Clarion started asking for his opinion on business matters, valuing his calm, grounded perspective. Reese found himself asking about her family, about the lonely world of a CEO, a life as isolating in its own way as his had been. One evening, instead of heading home, Clarion found herself walking with Reese to pick up Ilara from Mrs. Gable's apartment. The sight of Clarion Shaw, one of the most powerful women in the country, sitting on Mrs. Gable's floral sofa and seriously discussing the artistic merits of a finger painting, was something Reese never thought he'd see. Ilara, with no sense of corporate hierarchy, had adopted Clarion completely. She would run to her for a hug as readily as she would to her father. Clarion, in turn, seemed to thaw under the little girl's unconditional affection. The ice that had formed around her heart from years of corporate battles began to melt. A few weeks later, Clarion insisted on attending Ilara's school play. She sat between Reese and Mrs. Gable in the stuffy auditorium. watching Alara, dressed as a slightly wobbly tree, deliver her one line with dramatic flair. During the applause, Clarion's eyes were shining. "She's incredible," she whispered to Rhys. "She takes after her mother," he replied, the words coming out easily, without the sharp pang of grief that usually accompanied them. He realized it was the first time he had spoken of Anya to Clarion. She simply squeezed his hand, a small, warm gesture of understanding that said more than words ever could. That weekend, Rhys drove out to the small cemetery where Anya was buried. He hadn't been there in months. He stood before the simple, granite headstone, the wind rustling the leaves of the old oak tree nearby. "Hi, Anne," he said softly. "A lot has changed." He told her everything, about the fight, about Clarion, about the new job. He told her how scared he'd been and how he was starting to feel alive again. I think you'd like her. She makes Alara laugh. She makes me laugh." He paused, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I'll never stop loving you, but I think it's time to let someone else in. I think it's time for us to be happy again." He left a single fresh lily on the grave and walked away, feeling not sadness but a quiet, peaceful sense of release. The following Saturday, Clarion invited them to her family's country estate for the day. As Alara ran laughing through fields of wildflowers, chasing butterflies, Rhys and Clarion sat on a stone bench overlooking a serene lake. "I haven't been here in years," Clarion said, her voice soft. "After my father passed, it was just a place filled with memories, a place I associated with being alone." She turned to him, her blue eyes clear and direct. "You know, when you work your way to the top, you build walls to protect yourself. It's necessary, but it's lonely. I hadn't realized how lonely I was until you and Alara came into my life." She reached out, her fingers gently touching the back of his hand. "The night you saved me in that garage, you did more than just stop those men. You woke me up. And in my office, when I felt like the walls were closing in, you made me feel safe. Not just physically safe, just safe." Rhys turned his hand over and intertwined his fingers with hers. Her hand felt small and warm in his. "You did the same for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a ghost. I was just going through the motions of living for Alara's sake. You pulled me back into the world. You gave me a purpose again. You gave my daughter a reason to see her dad as a hero." They sat in a comfortable silence for a long moment, watching Alara, a tiny, vibrant speck of joy in the vast green landscape. "This is crazy," Clarion said finally, a small, wry smile on her lips. "I know," Rhys replied, his heart feeling fuller than it had in years. "But it's the only thing that makes sense." Their wedding was a small, private affair held in the garden of the country estate. There were no press, no business partners, just a handful of people who mattered. Kenji stood as Rhys's best man. Mrs. Gable wiped away happy tears, and Alara, in a beautiful white dress, was the world's most enthusiastic flower girl, scattering petals with joyous abandon. As Rhys watched Clarion walk towards him, not as a CEO in a power suit, but as a radiant woman in a simple, elegant dress, he knew he was home. He was no longer a janitor in hiding or a sensei haunted by his past. He was a husband, a father, a man who had found his horizon. Months later, on a bright sunny afternoon, the three of them were walking through a city park. Rhys had his arm around Clarion's shoulders, and Alara was skipping ahead, her laughter carrying on the breeze. They weren't a CEO, a security chief, and a child. They were just a family, a man who had learned to fight again, not for glory, but for love. A woman who had learned that true strength wasn't in the walls you build, but in the people you let in. And a little girl who had been the bridge all along. Rhys watched his wife and daughter, his heart overflowing with a quiet, profound gratitude. He had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and he had found that it was more beautiful than he had ever remembered. And just like that, another story is over. I always wonder where you all are, and what you're doing when you listen to these. If you feel like sharing, drop a comment, and let me know. Are you on a long drive, working on something, or just winding down for the night? It's nice to picture the story finding a home with you, wherever you are. If you'd like more stories like this one to keep you company on your journey, you know what to do. Hitting subscribe and that little bell means you'll always have another one waiting for you when you need it. A simple like helps others find a companion in these tales too. Thanks for letting me share this space and time with you. It really is a privilege. Until the next one, stay safe out there.